Billionaire treated his pregnant wife like a burden until she took everything with one move. Dark secrets often lurk behind gilded gates. In the grander state of self-made millionaire Jonathan Pierce, illusions of glamour mask a toxic storm waiting to erupt. He had everything: wealth, success, and power, yet the one thing he lacked was compassion for the wife carrying his unborn child. Their fairy tale marriage soon revealed its cracks, exposing a cruel side to Jonathan that no one saw coming. As the pressure of pregnancy grew, so did his resentment, boiling over into a shocking series of events. In this riveting tale, discover how one woman turned heartbreak into triumph and claimed more than anyone expected. Annalise Pierce stood at the towering marble entryway of her husband's estate, hugging her pregnant belly as waves of anxiety coursed through her. The door was 3 times her height, carved with intricate patterns of vines and flowers, yet it felt more like the entrance to a gilded cage than a home. She could still recall the day she first laid eyes on the sprawling mansion, a moment filled with awe and naive hope. Back then, she believed Jonathan Pierce had rescued her from a modest life and placed her into a world of luxury and devotion. Those illusions shattered under the weight of unspoken expectations. Jonathan, always impeccably dressed in crisp shirts and tailored suits, used to greet her with a gentle kiss on the forehead. Now, that kiss had become a cool nod, more of a businesslike courtesy than an act of affection. His eyes told the real story, full of impatience whenever he glanced at her stomach, as if their unborn child were an inconvenience rather than a blessing. Tonight, the tension was palpable. A lavish dinner party was in progress, with notable figures from Jonathan's company, Pierce Enterprises, swirling around in designer dresses and suits worth more than some people's annual salaries. Expensive fragrances filled the air, but beneath the surface lingered the sour tang of disdain. In every corner of the great hall, voices whispered about business deals and strategic alliances, no one truly listening to the harpist's gentle music in the background. Annalise tried to maintain composure, offering smiles that never reached her eyes. At just 26, she was younger than many of Jonathan's cronies, and they dismissed her presence with polite disinterest. She was nothing more than the trophy wife, a role she had never fully embraced, but felt obligated to fill. Yet her pregnancy changed the dynamic, and whispers of "when's the baby due" were undercut by disingenuous concern. Jonathan, standing across the room with his business partner, Daniel Harrington, flashed a brilliant smile that never touched his soul. The moment he spotted Annalise, however, his expression soured. He excused himself from the conversation and marched over to her, his polished shoes clicking ominously against the marble floor. "You're supposed to be upstairs resting," he hissed, eyes flicking from her swollen belly to her delicate heels. "I thought we agreed you'd keep a low profile. These events are for networking, not for playing house." Annalise's cheeks burned. "I just wanted to greet everyone and show I'm part of this family. Is that such a problem?" His lips thinned in frustration. "Stay for 5 minutes, then go. You know how I feel about drawing attention to personal matters." "Especially that," he said, nodding curtly at her stomach. Shame and anger twisted inside her, threatening to boil over. She wondered how the kind, supportive fiancé she'd once adored had transformed into this cold, calculating millionaire. He was consumed by status, always finding new ways to prove himself to the world. Whenever she tried to share her excitement about their baby, a child she had hoped would bring them closer, Jonathan only saw complications and liabilities. In that moment, as she looked at Jonathan's disdainful expression, a realization took hold. She was trapped, utterly alone, in a marriage built on convenience, not genuine love. The house, the parties, the wealth, none of it mattered if the man beside her refused to treat her with dignity. Despite her fear, she resolved to survive this night and every other. She might be captive in his gilded cage for now, but she silently vowed she would not remain caged forever. Long before she ever set foot in the Pierce mansion, Annalise Baker found solace in her mother. Paula's tiny flower shop, petals and dreams. Though money was tight, there was always laughter and love in that fragrant world of blossoms. When her father passed away, Annalise vowed to someday expand the shop, so her hard-working mother could finally rest. Her big chance arrived in college when she landed an internship at Pierce Enterprises, a role she hoped would teach her the ropes of running a successful business. That was where she first locked eyes with Jonathan Pierce. In those early days, he moved through the office with effortless charm, greeting interns and executives alike by name. He exuded both ambition and genuine warmth, qualities that drew her in before she had time to question whether he was too good to be true. Within a few weeks, Jonathan was inviting her out to dinners just to discuss her progress. Those evenings became the highlight of Annalise's hectic schedule. Over artfully plated meals, they'd talk not just about work, but her dreams, her family, her love for simple pleasures. Jonathan seemed fascinated by her background, insisting her fresh perspective made him better at what he did. Soon, their professional camaraderie melted into something deeper. Jonathan proposed marriage not long after her graduation, offering promises of security and devotion that dazzled Annalise into an immediate yes. She believed he truly respected her humble beginnings, relishing the way she remained unpretentious in his lavish world. Yet even then, hairline cracks appeared. He'd sometimes criticize how she dressed or the friends she kept, framing it as help to fit in with his circle. Eager to please, Annalise overlooked the hints of control. Back then, she couldn't fathom how this magnetic man, the one who introduced her to a life of elegance, might one day seem more like a captor than a loving husband. Reflecting on her journey, she wondered, had she ever truly left the warmth of that small flower shop, or had she simply been carried too far away to find her way back? Annalise woke up the next morning enveloped in the early sunlight that peeked through tall French windows. Her pregnancy, now in its 6th month, made her movement slow and cumbersome. She had not slept well, haunted by the memory of Jonathan snapping at her during the dinner party. Tired and sore, she tried to push aside the heaviness in her heart. She pressed a gentle hand against her belly, feeling the flutter of the baby's kicks. That spark of life inside her was the one source of unadulterated joy. Sometimes, in the quiet of dawn, she whispered her fears to the child, as if they could share a private understanding in a household full of pretense. A discreet knock on the bedroom door interrupted her thoughts. It was Lucinda Graves, the family's housekeeper who had looked after Jonathan since he was a boy. Lucinda had more or less become Annalise's confidant, a compassionate presence in a house otherwise cold and transactional. "Good morning, Mrs. Pierce," Lucinda said softly, stepping into the spacious room. "I brought you some tea and oatmeal. Thought you might need a gentle start today." She paused, observing Annalise's troubled expression. "Are you all right?" Annalise forced a small smile. "Thank you, Lucinda. I'm fine, just a bit tired." Lucinda's eyes flickered with concern, but she didn't press. Mr. Pierce left early for a business meeting. He said he'd be back by evening. "Oh," Annalise muttered, unsure if she felt relief or disappointment at Jonathan's absence. "Thank you, Lucinda." After finishing her breakfast, Annalise decided to venture outside, hoping fresh air would clear her thoughts. The estate's gardens, pruned to perfection, bloomed with exotic flowers brought in from around the globe. It was an Edenic tableau, made possible by the labor of gardeners Jonathan scarcely acknowledged. She strolled past a marble fountain shaped like a mermaid, the water cascading in a soft, rhythmic whisper. She remembered how, in the early days, Jonathan had taken her on tours of the garden at sunrise. They would talk about their dreams for the future, imagining running through the rows of roses with their future children. That promise now felt like a distant memory. She barely had time to linger on her nostalgia before her phone rang. The name on the screen read Melissa Givens, one of her close college friends who lived back in Brampton. Annalise's heart lifted at the familiar name. "Annie, how are you?" Melissa's voice was warm with concern. She always sensed whenever Annalise needed a friend. "I've been trying to reach you." "I'm all right," Annalise lied, though tears prickled at the corners of her eyes. "Just busy." Melissa hesitated. "You don't sound fine. You know you can tell me anything." Annalise took a breath. She glanced around to ensure no staff members were within earshot. "Jonathan's been distant. More than distant, he's been cruel, really. He acts like my pregnancy is a problem, as though it's taking something away from him rather than adding to our family. I can't shake the feeling that he regrets even having a child." Melissa tutted sympathetically. "Oh, Annie, that's terrible. You need to take care of yourself. And if you need an out, I don't have anywhere to go," Annalise admitted, pressing a trembling hand to her eyes. "My mum's flower shop is barely making ends meet, and I haven't worked in months." Jonathan insisted I stop. He said I should focus on being a proper wife. "Listen, you're strong and you're smart," Melissa urged. "You deserve better than this. Maybe talk to a lawyer, just to know your options." The word lawyer sent a shiver through Annalise's spine. She had been so in love that she'd never seriously considered a future without Jonathan. The mere thought of confronting him on financial or legal matters terrified her. But Melissa's concern planted a seed of urgency in her mind. They spoke for a few more minutes before ending the call. In the silence that followed, Annalise felt a swirl of conflicting emotions: loneliness, anger, and a flicker of determination. She replayed Jonathan's resentful words in her mind, recalling the hostility that now clouded his every look. She realized that love should never require someone to sacrifice their dignity, nor should it degrade them in their most vulnerable moments. With a deep sigh, she headed back into the house, her shoulders squared as though bracing for a coming storm. Unknown to her, events would soon unravel in ways she could never have foreseen, testing every shred of courage she possessed. One thing was certain: the life forming inside her gave her a reason to fight, even if she had to do it alone. 2 weeks later, the tension between Annalise and Jonathan had only intensified. He had become increasingly preoccupied with a significant merger deal, an acquisition that promised to vault Pierce Enterprises into a new league of global influence. The entire house vibrated with tension as phone calls, legal documents, and financial proposals flooded in day and night. Annalise tried to stay out of his way, but Jonathan made it nearly impossible. He complained if she spent too long in the living room while he was conducting business calls. Yet he would berate her if she retreated to their bedroom, accusing her of neglecting her wifely duties to make him look good in front of clients. Her pregnancy had also become more difficult. She dealt with morning sickness that sometimes lasted all day, plus swelling feet and constant fatigue. Yet Jonathan seemed blind to it all, pushing her to attend corporate dinners and smile for camera flashes, only to criticize her afterward for not looking energetic enough. Any attempt to express her discomfort was met with scorn. One evening, Jonathan hosted an informal business gathering at home, inviting major investors and attorneys close to finalizing the deal. He insisted that Annalise dress impeccably, so she slipped into a floor-length emerald gown that clung tightly around her pregnancy bump. She willed herself to look composed, even though every step in her heels felt like an uphill battle. When she descended the grand staircase, she saw Jonathan standing with his closest associate, Daniel Harrington, and a group of high-net worth investors from overseas. Their eyes flicked immediately to her enlarged stomach. Sensing her own vulnerability, Annalise lifted her chin and tried to channel the confidence she had once shown in her scholarship interviews. Jonathan introduced her stiffly. "This is my wife, Annalise. She'll be joining us briefly." It was hardly a glowing introduction, but she flashed a polite smile. For the next hour, Annalise floated through the gathering, offering small talk and sipping ginger ale while the others indulged in champagne. Her back ached and her feet throbbed, but she stuck it out to maintain appearances for Jonathan's sake. She noticed a few kind souls among the investors who asked about her health or the due date, and she responded as graciously as she could. Everything unraveled when one of the investors, a formidable woman named Dr. Marta Novak, approached Annalise with genuine curiosity. "I hear you once worked for Pierce Enterprises. Do you plan to return after the baby is born?" Annalise answered honestly. "I'd love to contribute again, though I haven't worked out the details with Jonathan yet." Moments later, Jonathan appeared at Annalise's side, an unsettling scowl etched across his face. "We actually haven't discussed that," he interjected, his tone sharper than necessary. He placed a proprietary hand on Annalise's shoulder. "My wife has more than enough responsibilities at home." Dr. Novak arched an eyebrow. "Is that so?" "Well, I've always found that intelligent partners can be major assets in business. Perhaps there's a suitable position for her in your new venture." Jonathan's grip tightened on Annalise's shoulder. He forced a brittle smile. "We'll see," he said curtly, then steered Annalise away. The minute they were out of earshot, Jonathan rounded on her. "Do you enjoy making me look incompetent in front of my investors?" Annalise froze, stunned by his sudden ire. "What are you talking about?" "I merely answered Dr. Novak's question. You should have told her you're not returning to work anytime soon. I'm on the verge of the biggest business deal of my career, and I don't need the complication of people thinking my wife can't decide where her priorities lie." Heat flared in Annalise's face. Her voice shook as she tried to remain calm. "Jonathan, I'm pregnant, not incapacitated. It's normal for me to want a career." He leaned in, voice low with rage. "We are not normal. I'm building an empire here. If you can't see that, you're more naive than I thought." Annalise stared back in disbelief. She realized how differently they now viewed each other. Jonathan saw her as a hindrance, a burden. The crushing weight of that realization caused something inside her to snap. Her throat tightened, tears threatening to spill, but she blinked them back, unwilling to break down in front of him and the guests. She turned away, ignoring his vicious glare, and limped back upstairs to her room. Once the door was shut, she let out a ragged sob. She felt hollow, betrayed by the husband she once worshipped, and yet, deep inside, another feeling simmered: anger. Anger that she had given up her independence, anger that Jonathan had shattered every promise, anger that she was being dismissed as nothing more than an accessory. That night, as murmurs of conversation and clinking glasses floated up from downstairs, Annalise lay awake, silently plotting how she might reclaim the power she once surrendered. A few days later, Annalise found herself in a situation she never imagined, sitting in the corner of a quiet cafe with a family lawyer, Robert Lanfield, recommended discreetly by her friend Melissa. She had snuck out of the mansion while Jonathan was at a board meeting, her heart pounding with every step as though she were committing a crime. Yet something in her gut urged her that this was the right step to take. Robert was middle-aged, with kind eyes and a pragmatic demeanor. He wore a simple grey suit and spoke in measured tones. "Miss S. Pierce," he said, leaning in so their conversation couldn't be overheard. "Melissa told me a bit about your concerns, but I'd like to hear it from you directly." Annalise swallowed nervously. "I'm pregnant with Jonathan's child, and things have taken a dark turn in our marriage. He's cold, controlling, and speaks about the baby as if it's a nuisance. I'm scared of what will happen if I stay, but I have no resources of my own. I'm not sure if I even have the right to anything. Robert gave her a sympathetic nod. In most jurisdictions, marital assets come into play. Your situation is further complicated by your pregnancy. The law generally aims to protect the interests of both the child and the mother, but high net worth divorces can be messy. Jonathan has powerful attorneys on retainer, doesn't he? She nodded miserably. Yes, he does, and they're ruthless. I've seen them in action when he buys out smaller companies. They stop at nothing. Robert's gaze hardened with resolve. Don't lose heart. There's a process. Typically, you'd be entitled to spousal support and child support, especially if your husband is as wealthy as you say. The biggest question is whether you want to remain married or if you're considering separation or divorce. Annalise's hands trembled. I never wanted it to come to that. I want him to acknowledge me, to treat me as a partner, not an inconvenience. But I'm not naive anymore. Jonathan doesn't seem willing to change. Robert offered her a business card. Take your time, think it over. My advice is to gather any and all documentation you can, financial statements, real estate papers, even text messages or emails where he might have admitted to certain behaviors. The more evidence you have, the stronger your position. She nodded, feeling a confusing mixture of relief and terror. Thank you, she whispered. I have to be careful. Jonathan has eyes everywhere. As Annalise left the cafe, her mind churned with possibilities. She felt guilty for planning behind Jonathan's back, but she reminded herself that she was protecting not just herself, but the tiny life growing within her. Each step back toward her car felt like wading deeper into uncharted waters. When she returned to the estate, she found Jonathan pacing the foyer, phone pressed to his ear. His face was contorted with frustration, and he barked directions at an unfortunate associate. Close that deal, or you're fired, he snapped before ending the call. The moment he saw her, suspicion clouded his expression. Where were you? She held up a take-out coffee cup, conjuring a white lie. I just went out for some fresh air. I felt cooped up. Jonathan's gaze flicked between the coffee cup and her face, as if he could smell deception. For a tense moment, she thought he would demand more answers, but he merely nodded, clearly too distracted by business woes. Fine. My attorneys and I are working around the clock to finalize the acquisition. Stay out of my way. Understood? She nodded, stepping aside so he could storm into his study. Once he was gone, Annalise allowed herself a small, shuddering exhale. She realized that each step she took consulting a lawyer, acting as though everything was normal, was setting the stage for a major confrontation. If Jonathan discovered her intentions, there would be no turning back. Later that night, Annalise sat in her bedroom reviewing old emails and messages Jonathan had sent during their early days. She hunted for any evidence of promises he had made about sharing assets or future plans. Tears blurred her vision as she recalled how sweet and thoughtful he once was. Each affectionate word seemed like a relic of a lost era. Still, she pressed on. She started a secret folder on her computer, labeling it Household Budget. In reality, it was a repository for anything that might help her prove her financial and emotional entitlements if matters escalated. The risk was immense. If Jonathan ever found it, his wrath would be unimaginable. Yet she pressed forward, spurred by the knowledge that she had to protect herself and her child. For the first time, Annalise felt a tiny spark of empowerment. Yes, she was terrified, and yes, the man she once loved now felt like a stranger. But she was no longer helpless. She was taking steps, however small, toward a future where she could stand on her own, perhaps a future where she wouldn't be treated as a burden, but as someone who deserved respect and security. Life in the Pierce estate grew more suffocating by the day. Annalise stuck to a routine. She would wake up early, have breakfast often alone, and do mild stretches recommended by her doctor. Then she would retreat to her private sitting room or the library, pretending to read or plan out nursery themes, all while discreetly searching for information that could secure her future. Every few hours, she'd have to appear in the main living areas to show her face, lest Jonathan suspect she was hiding something. One afternoon, as she strolled through the library's shelves in search of an old gardening manual, Annalise stumbled upon a locked cabinet tucked into a corner. It was crafted from dark mahogany, so unassuming that she had rarely given it a second glance. Yet something about the heavy brass lock piqued her curiosity. She knew Jonathan had a penchant for stashing important documents in unexpected places. Could this be a treasure trove of information? Her heart pounded in her chest. She considered searching for a key, but she knew rummaging through Jonathan's study was too risky. Instead, she carefully tried the tiny set of pick tools she'd once used for unlocking old desk drawers, a skill she'd learned out of necessity when her mother lost the keys to the flower shop's ancient cabinets. After several tense minutes, the lock clicked open. Inside, she found a few dusty ledgers, a small stack of file folders, and a worn black notebook. The ledgers were filled with business transactions dating back years, though many of the company names and amounts looked suspicious. She recognized neither the subsidiaries nor the figures. Feeling unsettled, she opened the black notebook. Pages upon pages contained coded entries, lists of transactions, cryptic notes about payoffs, and references to shell accounts. A cold realization gripped her. Jonathan was hiding something massive, potentially illegal. This explained his constant need to expand, to buy out smaller companies, and hush up any controversies. With each page, her stomach twisted further. She found references to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, suspicious transfers to individuals she'd never heard of, and the mention of bribing certain officials to expedite construction projects. If these documents ever came to light, they could destroy Jonathan's empire. As she stood there, the precariousness of her situation sank in. If Jonathan treated her like a burden now, how would he react if he learned she had unearthed his darkest secrets? She carefully snapped photos of a few pages with her phone, making sure to keep everything in its original order. Just then, she heard footsteps approaching. Her heart catapulted into her throat. With trembling hands, she locked the cabinet and shoved the phone into her pocket, hurrying away. She pretended to examine a nearby bookshelf when Lucinda appeared in the doorway. "Miss S. Pierce, are you all right?" "I heard noises," the housekeeper asked gently. Annalise forced a smile, though her voice wavered. "I'm fine, Lucinda, just searching for a book on garden upkeep." Lucinda nodded, but her worried gaze lingered. "Be careful, dear, you shouldn't strain yourself." "Yes, of course," Annalise replied, her pulse still thundering. Once Lucinda left, Annalise sank onto a velvet armchair, pressing a hand against her pounding heart. Finding these documents made everything far more dangerous, but also gave her an unexpected weapon. If Jonathan ever tried to strip her of her rights or take her child away, these files might be her only leverage. That realization felt both empowering and terrifying. Later that night, she couldn't sleep. She slipped out of bed and crept down the hall to a small guest room that she had turned into a private workspace. With careful deliberation, she transferred the photos to a hidden folder on her laptop, making multiple backups on encrypted cloud storage. She labeled each folder innocuously, so Jonathan or his tech-savvy associates would not suspect anything if they stumbled upon it. The next morning, Annalise felt the full weight of her discovery pressing on her chest as she watched Jonathan from across the breakfast table. He was engrossed in a conversation with Daniel Harrington over speakerphone, discussing final terms of the big merger. If Daniel only knew the skeletons locked in Jonathan's closet, he might think twice before forging an even deeper alliance. Over the next few days, Annalise carried her secret knowledge like a smouldering coal, uncertain whether it would spark a fire that would consume them all. For Jonathan, the stakes of the pending merger were enormous. For Annalise, the stakes of her unborn child's future were even higher. With every passing hour, the tension between them escalated. Neither spoke of their growing emotional rift, but neither could hide it either. Annalise often found herself running her hand over her belly, reminding herself of the life that made all her efforts worthwhile. She vowed to safeguard that life, no matter what, yet she couldn't ignore a gnawing fear. If Jonathan discovered she'd accessed his secret files, he might stop at nothing to silence her. It was noon when Annalise heard the familiar rumble of her mother's old sedan pulling up to the grand estate. Paula Baker rarely visited unannounced. Annalise rushed to the window and saw her mother step out, smoothing her second-hand skirt, her eyes darting around as though the mansion itself might swallow her. Annalise's heart clenched. She knew Paula must have sensed something was wrong. Hurrying down the sweeping staircase, Annalise greeted her mother with a tight hug. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "You could have called." Paula shrugged, her face etched with maternal worry. "Couldn't stop thinking about you. Something in my gut told me to come." "How are you, sweetheart?" "I'm hanging in there," Annalise replied, trying to force a reassuring smile. They settled in the sunroom, a lavish space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the meticulously manicured gardens. Paula gently held Annalise's hand, her voice hushed. "You know, I heard rumors back in town, whispers that Jonathan's new acquisition is stirring controversy. But that's not why I came. I came because I'm worried about you. You don't call as often, and when you do, you sound distant." Annalise hesitated, considering how much to reveal. "He's busy," she began slowly, "and stressed. But I'm managing." Paula narrowed her eyes. "That's not all, is it?" Tears pooled in Annalise's eyes as she lowered her gaze. "He's been different, distant, controlling. I'm pregnant, but he barely seems to care. I can't shake the feeling that I'm just in the way." Paula's lips pressed into a thin line. She squeezed her daughter's hand. "You shouldn't have to feel like that. Marriage is partnership, not a dictatorship. You're carrying his baby, for heaven's sake." Annalise swallowed the lump in her throat. She thought of telling her mother everything about Jonathan's hidden files and the lawyer, but that could thrust Paula into a dangerous situation. Instead, she merely whispered, "I'm considering my options. I'm not going to let him trample me anymore." Paula's eyes welled with pride and sadness. "I support you, whatever you decide. If you need me, the flower shop might not be a palace, but you'll always have a home with me." Annalise's chest tightened with gratitude and remorse. She remembered Jonathan's sneering claims that she had no place to go. Yet here was her mother, proving him wrong. She just hoped that if the worst came to pass, returning to Brampton could be a real option. Their conversation was interrupted by Jonathan's sudden appearance in the sunroom doorway. He carried himself with the air of an owner discovering trespassers on his property. He offered Paula a perfunctory nod. "Paula, I wasn't aware we were expecting you." Paula stood, her posture stiffening defensively. "I decided to visit my daughter and see how she's doing." Jonathan's mouth curved into a tight, polite smile. "You could have given us a heads up. Annalise has a strict schedule, especially in her condition." Annalise bristled at his insinuation that she was too fragile to handle a surprise visit. A flicker of anger sparked in her, but she kept her composure, not wanting to start a fight in front of her mother. "Well, my daughter and I are just fine," Paula said pointedly. She offered Annalise a reassuring glance. "I should go soon, but I'll be back. And Annalise, call me if you need anything." Annalise walked her mother to the front door, giving her one last hug. She could feel Jonathan's eyes drilling into her back. When Paula drove away, Annalise turned to face her husband. "Are surprise visits now forbidden in your kingdom?" she asked, voice tinged with sarcasm. Jonathan's jaw clenched. "You know how busy I am. Having your mother waltz in unannounced is disruptive. She's family, Jonathan. She has every right to see me," Annalise retorted, fueled by an uncharacteristic boldness. Jonathan exhaled sharply, as if reining in his temper. "I'll be in my study. Do not disturb me unless it's absolutely necessary." He left without another word, and Annalise sank onto a nearby chair, her nerves taut. At least for one fleeting moment, she felt supported by her mother's presence. Paula might not know the full extent of her suffering, but that brief visit had rekindled Annalise's inner resolve. She was not as isolated as Jonathan wanted her to believe. In the following days, Annalise continued to gather what evidence she could, scanning documents and saving crucial emails. She was building a protective wall for herself and her unborn child, one piece of proof at a time. Meanwhile, Jonathan grew increasingly agitated, snapping at the staff and refusing to engage in even the simplest of pleasantries. She suspected the final stages of his merger were hitting snags, but he volunteered no details. Every night, he locked himself in his study with his attorneys, emerging only for a few hours of sleep. Despite the tension, there was a sliver of hope glimmering in Annalise's mind. She had her mother and her friend Melissa in her corner. She had a lawyer ready to help, and she possessed incriminating documents that could tip the scales if Jonathan ever attempted to strip her of her rights. While it was terrifying to live this double life, Annalise felt a growing sense of determination, a newfound agency she never knew she had. Less than a week later, the crisp morning air brought a whirlwind of change to the Pierce estate. Jonathan burst into the dining room, where Annalise was nibbling toast. His face was red with fury, phone gripped so tightly in his hand that his knuckles gleamed white. She looked up, startled. "Jonathan, what happened?" He threw the phone onto the dining table, causing the silverware to clatter. "The deal, it's falling apart. One of our key investors pulled out at the last minute. They claim they received disturbing information about Pierce Enterprises, something about questionable offshore accounts." A shockwave ran through Annalise. Could her quiet efforts have been discovered? No, she had been extremely careful. It must be some other leak, or perhaps one of Jonathan's business rivals had sniffed out his unethical dealings. Whatever the source, the effect was devastating for Jonathan. "You can fix it," she ventured softly, choosing her words carefully. "You always do." He glared at her. "Do you have any idea what's at stake? This was supposed to be my crowning achievement, and now I look like a fool. Who's behind this? Who would risk crossing me?" Annalise swallowed. I wouldn't know." He stormed away, leaving her alone with a swirl of guilt and grim satisfaction. She didn't cause this, but his unscrupulous dealings had finally come back to haunt him. For a moment, she felt a pang of sympathy. Despite everything, she remembered the man he used to be. But then she recalled how he had treated her like a burden, how he'd dismissed her hopes and dreams, how he'd ridiculed her pregnancy. That sympathy quickly vanished, replaced by a steely resolve. Over the next few days, the estate turned into a war zone. Jonathan's attorneys came and went at odd hours, each leaving with grave expressions. Phone calls rattled the halls at all times, with raised voices behind closed doors. Annalise tiptoed around, trying not to draw attention, but inside she felt a strange sense of vindication. Perhaps the cracks in Jonathan's empire were finally too deep to ignore. One afternoon, she retreated to her sitting room for a few moments of peace. As she sank into an armchair, she felt the baby shift in her belly. It was an oddly reassuring sensation, a reminder of the life waiting to enter the world, untouched by the chaos around them. She jumped when her phone buzzed a message from Melissa. "Heard about the deal. You okay? Let me know if you need me." XOXO Analyze typed a quick response. Doing my best. Might need that lawyer soon. Keeping you posted. Thank you for everything. No sooner had she hit send than she heard a commotion from the corridor. Jonathan was yelling at someone, and it sounded like Daniel Harrington. She stood and carefully opened the door a crack. "We had a contract," Jonathan bellowed. "You can't just walk away because of rumors." Daniel shot back, his voice shaking with anger. "Rumors? Those documents I received aren't rumors, Jonathan. They detail suspicious offshore activity that could land our entire operation in legal hell. I can't expose my firm to that kind of risk." For a moment, Jonathan was speechless. Then he growled, "So you're stabbing me in the back?" Daniel turned on his heel. "I'm protecting my own interests. Your secrets are your downfall, not mine." Analyze watched as Daniel stormed down the hallway, slamming the front door behind him. Jonathan stood there, trembling with rage, fists clenched at his sides. He looked like a man on the verge of losing everything he had worked for. That night, silence reigned. No attorneys came to visit, no phone calls rang through the estate. Analyze half expected Jonathan to unleash his wrath on her, but he remained locked in his study, perhaps too consumed by damage control to spare her a thought. While he remained preoccupied, Analyze used the time to finalize her contingency plans. She scanned more of Jonathan's documents, storing them in a hidden folder. She sent a cryptic email to Robert Lanfield, letting him know the situation was escalating and she might need swift action. Every click of her mouse felt like a step toward liberation, though the stakes were impossibly high. Early the next morning, a weary Jonathan emerged from his study with bloodshot eyes. He looked older, worn down by the weight of potential scandal. Analyze braced herself for a confrontation, but he barely acknowledged her as he trudged upstairs to shower and change. She couldn't help but feel that a moment of reckoning was around the corner, an inevitable collision between his crumbling empire and her quiet rebellion. With her hand over her belly, Analyze whispered a promise. "I'll protect us, no matter what." By the time the weekend arrived, the mansion was steeped in tension so thick it felt tangible. Jonathan, desperate to salvage any part of the collapsing deal, planned a lavish brunch to impress a new wave of potential investors. It was a risky move, flaunting wealth and stability at a time when rumors of corruption were spreading like wildfire, but Jonathan believed maintaining an image of confidence was his best shot. On Sunday morning, caterers arrived with carts of delicacies, smoked salmon, artisan bread, imported cheeses, and pastries that sparkled with edible gold leaf. Analyze watched them come and go, setting up in the grand dining hall under Lucinda's careful supervision. Though her stomach churned with morning sickness, she forced herself to dress in a simple, elegant maternity dress. She knew Jonathan would insist she make an appearance, no matter how awkward it felt to pretend everything was fine. By midday, the new investors, two couples and a grey-haired man representing a foreign consortium, sat around the long table. Jonathan, in a crisp navy suit, was all charm and composure, welcoming them warmly. He beckoned Analyze closer, introducing her with that stiff, practiced smile. "And this is my wife, Analyze," he announced. "We're expecting our first child soon. It's an exciting time for our family." Analyze mustered a polite smile. "Welcome to our home. It's wonderful to have you all here." The new investors seemed pleasant enough, though their guarded expressions hinted they were here out of curiosity as much as genuine interest. As the meal progressed, Jonathan launched into a practiced pitch about Pierce Enterprises' growth potential. Analyze played the role of supportive spouse, nodding at the right moments, all the while noticing how often the investors exchanged private glances. Then, mid-meal, the doorbell rang. Lucinda hurried to answer it, returning with two uniformed police officers and a stern-looking woman in a business suit. The table fell silent. Jonathan rose to greet them, confusion etched on his face. "May I help you?" he asked, trying to maintain composure. The woman, who introduced herself as Detective Gabriela Morales, flashed her badge. "We have a warrant to search the premises for financial records pertaining to an ongoing investigation." A chill swept through the room. Annalise's heart pounded so violently she feared it might harm the baby. She glanced at Jonathan, whose face blanched before turning a furious red. "This must be a mistake," he sputtered. "My attorneys were never notified." Detective Morales held up a stack of papers. "We have reason to believe Pierce Enterprises is linked to multiple counts of fraud and bribery. We're here to collect evidence." The tension in the dining hall was palpable. The new investors shifted uncomfortably, some clearing their throats while others pointedly avoided Jonathan's gaze. Jonathan tried to argue, citing confidentiality and corporate privileges, but the officers brushed aside his protests and dispersed to begin their search. Annalise, feeling both terror and relief, stood there, stunned. On one hand, her life could be yanked into a legal maelstrom. On the other, she realized the power dynamic was shifting. The illusions Jonathan had built were crumbling under real scrutiny. Jonathan spun around, his anger suddenly directed at her. "What did you do?" he hissed in a low voice. His eyes blazed with accusation, as though she had personally summoned the authorities. She swallowed hard. "I didn't call the police, Jonathan." He stared at her for a moment, clearly uncertain whether to believe her. The new investors, eager to distance themselves from any criminal entanglement, hastily made excuses to leave. Within minutes, they were gone, leaving the once lavish brunch in disarray. Detective Morales systematically combed through Jonathan's office, searching file cabinets and demanding access to his computer. Jonathan followed her, barking about lawsuits and legal rights. The uniformed officers took notes, photographed documents, and scanned the house for anything relevant. Annalise found herself huddled near the dining table, heart pounding. She felt as if she were watching the final act of a tragic play. Lucinda hovered at her elbow, whispering a concerned, "Are you okay, Miss S. Pierce?" "I'm fine," Annalise murmured, though she was anything but. She silently wondered if her stash of evidence might be discovered in the process. Part of her feared it, another part welcomed it. Eventually, the police collected what they needed and left. Jonathan paced the foyer like a caged animal, face contorted in fury. "They've ruined me!" he shouted, slamming his fist against a wall. Annalise flinched, stepping back to avoid his wrath. He rounded on her once more. "If I find out you had any part in this, you'll regret it." She met his glare, trembling yet resolute. "I had nothing to do with the police coming here, but maybe this should tell you something. You can't hide everything forever." He glowered, speechless for a moment, then stormed up the stairs. In the echoing silence that followed, Annalise wrapped her arms protectively around her belly. It felt like the final veneer of Jonathan's perfect world had been ripped away. The mask he'd worn for so long was shattered, and she was certain that the real battle, the one for her freedom and her child's future, was about to erupt. Hours after the police search, Jonathan locked himself in his study, refusing dinner and ignoring calls from Daniel Harrington. Annalise, meanwhile, retreated to her room, trying to calm her pounding heart. She busied herself with mundane tasks, folding baby clothes, reviewing nursery color swatches, anything to distract from the storm brewing downstairs. Late in the evening, she heard a knock at her door. She cracked it open and found Jonathan standing there, eyes bloodshot and hair disheveled in a way she'd never seen before. He was holding a glass of whiskey, the smell of alcohol pungent in the air. "We need to talk," he said, his voice slurred with uncharacteristic rawness. Without waiting for a response, he pushed past her into the room. Annalise closed the door, her pulse racing. "What is it?" He turned to her, his expression a twisted amalgam of despair and anger. The entire deal is dead. The company's stock is plummeting. Investors are pulling out left and right, all because of these damn allegations. She stood there quietly, unsure how to respond. "And you," he continued, pointing a shaky finger, "you stand there acting all innocent, but I know you've been rummaging around my affairs." Her throat went dry. Could he have discovered the hidden files, the photographs she'd taken of his coded transactions? She tried to keep her voice steady. "You're paranoid, Jonathan. I had nothing to do with the police or your failing deal. Maybe it's just—" "Shut up!" he roared, taking a step closer. The whiskey in his glass sloshed over the rim, darkening the plush carpet. "You think I haven't noticed you sneaking around, talking to that lawyer friend of yours? Do you think I'm stupid?" Annalise's heart hammered. "I spoke to a lawyer, yes, because I'm scared. You've become someone I don't recognize, and I have to protect myself and the baby." Jonathan's eyes flared, and for a moment she feared he might strike her. Instead, he hurled the glass at the wall. It shattered, spraying shards that glinted under the overhead light. "You think you're going to leave me? Take my money, my child," he spat. "Not a chance. I will destroy anyone who helps you." Annalise felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She thought of the secret folder of evidence she had, of the phone numbers she'd memorized for immediate help if things turned violent. "If you hurt me," she said in a tremulous whisper, "the police won't hesitate to dig even deeper into your affairs." "Is that what you want?" He glared at her, his rage momentarily quelled by realization. Even in his drunken state, he knew that physically harming her could be the final nail in his coffin. With a strangled sound of frustration, he stormed out of the room, leaving her quivering in the aftermath. Once she was alone, Annalise sank to the floor, pressing a hand to her belly. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "Mama's going to keep you safe, no matter what." She fumbled for her phone and called Melissa, leaving a shaky voicemail. "Things are worse than ever. He's not himself. I need to get out." The next morning, she awakened to find a text from Melissa waiting for her. "Pack what you need. I'll be outside at midnight with my car. We'll drive to my place in Brampton. Your mum already offered to take you in if you want, but for now, come to me. Don't tell him. Be careful." Annalise read the message 3 times, her mind whirling. Escaping in the middle of the night seemed drastic, but Jonathan's fury was escalating beyond reason. She couldn't risk waiting for the next outburst. She began packing essentials into a single suitcase, trembling with anticipation. The hours leading up to midnight felt like an eternity. Every time she crossed paths with Jonathan, her stomach lurched. He looked haunted, muttering under his breath about lawyers and ungrateful traitors. He demanded she stay in her room, ordering Lucinda to bring her meals. In a twisted way, his reclusive state made it easier for her to slip items into her suitcase without being noticed. As darkness fell, Annalise stood at her window, staring at the grand estate that had once dazzled her. The gates, the gardens, the massive marble halls, it was all a fortress of wealth she no longer wanted any part of. Tonight, she would finally break free. But she had no idea just how violently Jonathan would react when he realized she was gone, or how far-reaching his vengeance might be. Still, she reminded herself of one truth: freedom was within her grasp, and for the sake of her baby, she had no choice but to seize it. Midnight arrived, cloaked in stillness. Annalise stood in the dimly lit foyer, suitcase in hand, every nerve in her body on high alert. Lucinda had conveniently retired early, perhaps sensing something significant was afoot. Annalise slipped on a pair of comfortable flats heels would be impossible for a quick escape, and crept toward the back entrance that led to the gardens. She paused at the threshold, glancing back at the vast interior of the mansion. Memories flickered through her mind, the day Jonathan carried her over the threshold. After their wedding, the lavish parties that once seemed so exciting, even the fleeting moments of tenderness he'd shown, those recollections were eclipsed by the cruelty and heartbreak that had dominated her later years here. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open. Night air enveloped her, cool and bracing. She carefully navigated the garden's winding paths, trying not to disturb the gravel too much. At the estate's side gate, she typed in the security code she'd memorized months ago. The gate clicked open, and she held her breath, praying Jonathan wouldn't hear the faint, mechanical hum. Outside, the world was quiet, except for chirping crickets. She spotted Melissa's car idling with its headlights off. Melissa rushed out to help with the suitcase. "You made it," she whispered, her voice trembling with relief. "Let's go." They slid into the car, and Melissa drove off in near silence, the mansion's silhouette shrinking in the rearview mirror. Annalise clutched her belly, a swirl of fear and hope tangling inside her. She didn't know what Jonathan's reaction would be when he discovered her missing, but she couldn't look back now. Several miles out, Melissa cleared her throat. "Are you sure you want to go to my place?" "Your mum's already said she'll take you in." Annalise shook her head. "For now, I want to keep him guessing. He might suspect I'd run to my mum's, and I don't want him showing up there in a rage. Let me lie low with you first, and I'll call my lawyer once I'm settled." Melissa squeezed her hand in understanding. "You're doing the right thing, Annie." They reached Melissa's modest apartment in Brampton, just as a pale sunrise began to colour the sky. The space was small but cosy, a stark contrast to the mansion's cold opulence. Melissa insisted Annalise take the bedroom while she slept on the couch. Exhausted, Annalise collapsed onto the bed, feeling the baby shift restlessly in her womb. She murmured a quiet prayer for strength before succumbing to a fitful sleep. A few hours later, she woke to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly. She checked the screen, dozens of missed calls, texts, and voicemails from Jonathan. Fear coiled in her stomach. She steeled herself and played the most recent voicemail. "Annalise, get back here now. You have no right to run off with my child. If you don't return within the next 12 hours, I will have my attorneys file kidnapping charges. You think you can just walk away? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Her heart hammered, but she also felt a flare of righteous anger. Kidnapping charges? She was the mother of this child, fleeing a toxic environment. She refused to be bullied. She recalled the secret stash of documents she had, the coded ledger that hinted at Jonathan's illegal dealings, and the knowledge that she could expose it all if he pushed too far. She dialed Robert Lanfield, the family lawyer who had been waiting for her call. He picked up after the first ring. "Miss S. Pierce? Are you safe?" "I am," she replied, voice shaky but determined. "I've left him. He's threatening legal action. I have evidence that could ruin his reputation and possibly incriminate him. I need to file for protection and prepare for a custody battle." Robert's tone was calm and reassuring. "I'll begin the paperwork immediately. Gather whatever documentation you can. We'll need it to counter his claims. Also, if he contacts you, direct him to speak with me." After ending the call, Annalise leaned back, exhaling a breath she felt she'd been holding for months. She glanced at her phone's gallery, where she had photos of the incriminating notebook pages. A sense of power, of finally taking control of her life, coursed through her veins. If Jonathan wanted a war, she was ready to fight. That afternoon, with Melissa by her side, Annalise filed the paperwork for a restraining order and custody rights. She handed over digital copies of Jonathan's suspicious files to Robert, who assured her they'd be a formidable bargaining chip. Word spread quickly among Jonathan's circles that Annalise had left and that she wasn't returning. His threats, once terrifying, now seemed hollow in the face of legal scrutiny. Within days, the tide had turned completely. Jonathan's empire was in shambles, his once loyal associates jumping ship at the first whiff of serious legal trouble. And when news broke that Annalise intended to expose his fraudulent dealings if he didn't comply with a fair settlement, Jonathan had no choice but to negotiate. In one calculated move, choosing to walk away and use his secrets as leverage, Annalise had taken everything Jonathan held dear. His facade, his control, his confidence that he could treat her however he pleased without consequence. Though the battle ahead would still be fraught with legal complexities, for the first time, Annalise felt genuinely free. She was no longer a pawn in his game. Now, the next move was hers, and she intended to make it count for herself, and for the child she was determined to protect above all else. Nothing cuts deeper than betrayal, and nothing heals faster than reclaiming one's own power. Annalise, once trapped under the weight of luxury and a loveless marriage, discovered the path to freedom lay in one bold decision: walking away. By seizing evidence of Jonathan's illicit activities, she dismantled his iron grip on her life, protecting her future and securing her child's well-being. In a world where wealth often overshadows justice, Annalise became a testament to the strength found within a mother's resolve. Her story reminds us that no amount of money can buy back respect once forfeited, nor love once betrayed. If this story captivated you, please remember to hit that like button, drop a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss more real-life drama and inspiring tales. Your engagement fuels our passion to bring you more riveting stories. Share this journey with someone who needs to know courage can overcome any odds.